Welcome to the Bible Nexus podcast, where biblical history, geography, and theology converge to fortify our faith in the living God. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Habana and Andy Olson.
Welcome back for episode 11. I've been off by one for the last couple, but this one is 11. And we are recording on, this is a May episode, we're recording on May 32nd. And we expect to post on May 33rd.
Yeah, we're changing the times and seasons.
But, and we will be back soon with a June episode too. So we are talking about the Mosaic Covenant, moving on from
the Abrahamic. We did a two episode for the Abraham because there was so much kind of packed in there. And I think we'll be able to get the Mosaic law or covenant in one. And the elements today, I think, are very instructive and important for understanding the whole counsel of God. But there's also some pitfalls that we need to be aware of in regards to the Mosaic covenant that will kind of stress as we get to the New Testament and the new covenant being forged by Christ in his blood.
Okay. Before we get into like the specifics of Mosaic, is there any kind of crossover or anything that we need to pull off of the Abrahamic that kind of carries over into the Mosaic?
Yeah, I think you would still say the Mosaic is born out in some way of the Abrahamic covenant. Mm-hmm. Although the Abrahamic covenant is an unconditional covenant, the seed and the promises are finding their way through this people that are Abraham's physical offspring. So the fact that there's a land, which is the same land that is promised to Abraham, that is at work here within the dynamics of the Mosaic covenant, the same people, at least from a physical standpoint, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12 sons. So there is a connection there, but we're going to have to realize the contrast as well, because,
sure,
that's the one thing that we talked about at length when we looked at the Abrahamic covenant was, how does one become an heir of the Abrahamic covenant? And it isn't through the works. This is one of the big things that we know through the New Testament is it isn't through the works of the law, but through faith in Christ. That is how one is joined and included in the Abrahamic covenant.
So really, we're going to get to kind of later on in our discussion New Testament implications, but not to get ahead of ourselves, but as New Testament believers, we often talk about this contrast between law and grace, and
right,
the Abrahamic and the Mosaic kind of being grace and then law.
I think there in a lot of ways.
We talked about the fulfillment of Abrahamic really being future.
Yeah, there is a future dynamic of the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant with the natural offspring of Abraham. And furthermore, us receiving the land, even for us who are believers in Christ, we see it's Gentiles or Jews in this era. We are looking forward to the consummation of the Abrahamic covenant, which is a land promise, which is a city promise, which we read in Hebrews chapter 11. So, yeah, there certainly is cross-pollination here, and it's going to take some careful treading of the land to be able to accurately announce and discern the ways by which we are to understand and appreciate the Mosaic covenant, but realize that there is a break. There is a break, and we're no longer under the stewardship or the schoolmaster of the law.
Mm-hmm. So where do you want to start? Should we start with the history of Mosaic?
Yeah, I think what we should do today in this episode is let's just look at kind of the historical, again, Bible Nexus, look at the historical and geographical as well as theological elements of this. So historically, we are going to be hundreds of years after the Mosaic or the Abrahamic covenant is established. Geographically, we are going to be starting in the land of Egypt, then we're going to go into likely the land of Saudi Arabia. It's something we can maybe touch on a little bit, as the debate as to where Mount Sinai is, which is the mountain of the marriage between Israel and the Lord, and then they journey. They journey up to the time to Kadesh Barnea, to the time of the rebellion, and then they wander for 40 years before entering into the promised land. And so we'll also be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 28, which is a very key passage in regards to the Mosaic law, because let's establish this from the outset, because it's a very important thing to understand. The Abrahamic covenant was built on promises that God gave to Abraham by a promise, by grace. These things were not dependent on Abraham's desire or effort. There were no curses granted to Abraham here. It was all promises of blessing to Abraham. Now, with the Mosaic covenant, we are going to be witnessing the establishment of a conditional or a bilateral covenant. And that conditional bilateral covenant is speaking as such that if the nation is obedient, they will be blessed. If they are disobedient, they will be cursed. And we'll outline what the blessings and the curses are as we go through this. And then we will, after we get through the Deuteronomy 28, we will get to talk and have a conversation about the New Covenant, the New Testament. We will be getting a little ahead of ourselves, because New Covenant is something that is on our...
That's a different covenant.
But it's a different covenant that we'll talk about later. But we'll at least touch on some of the things where the Old Covenant, and some people have issue with, you shouldn't call it the Old Covenant. I think you can call it the Old Covenant, because Hebrews does. The Holy Spirit does in Hebrews chapter 8. So... the Old Covenant is something that is good. We should not look at the Mosaic Covenant as something that is bad, but it's not something we are under anymore as the people of God in this era.
Mm-hmm. So where should we kick off on that whole discussion then?
Let's just start with history. So history and geography here. So historically, it is hundreds of years after the Abrahamic covenant. Now remember, Abraham gave birth to Isaac. Isaac gave birth to Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. And it's through the vehicle of one of Jacob's sons, Jacob, who becomes Israel. And we have these 12 sons whom the 12 tribes come from. But remember, they sold Joseph into slavery, and he went down to Egypt. And then there was famine in the land, and the children of Jacob, of Israel, went down to Egypt. And there they stayed because they had provisions and protection because of Joseph. Mm-hmm. Now we read at the beginning of Exodus, and again, we're going to be doing a lot of broad strokes today. So there certainly will be places that we stop and we'll read some out of the scriptures, but we're going to be doing a lot of broad strokes today as far as looking at the history and geography. So in Exodus chapter 1, we read there's a king that arises that does not remember or know Joseph. Probably it's not that he didn't know about Joseph, it's that he didn't love him or respect him or see the value of what Joseph did, or remember and to honor him. Mm-hmm. So the Israelites begin to be persecuted and to be oppressed by the nation of Egypt, by the kingdom of Egypt. And then we're introduced in chapter 2 to this man named Moses. And that's where the term Mosaic comes from. It's not about arranging of stones. It's about the name Moses. So Mosaic covenant he's the mediator of this covenant. Now he's drawn out of the water of the river, and the life of Moses is divided into 120 years, 40 years apiece. There's division of the 120 years into 40 years apiece, 3 sections of 40. First 40, he's in Egypt. Then he kills a man. Then he flees to Midian and marries, and for 40 years is a shepherd out in Midian, which is east of Egypt. Then there is something that we've talked about quite a bit in this podcast already. There's the appearance of Malach Yahweh to Moses out of the burning bush on Oreb, which is Mount Sinai. Mm-hmm. And so, as we've explored well, and we won't retread this.
It's easy to lose sight of that this was the same place.
Yeah.
Where he got the burning bush and the 10 Commandments were 40 years apart at the same place.
No. It wasn't too far apart. So 40 years, Moses was at 80. And so he goes and brings them back. And so that's only a few months.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is the same place.
It's the same place. It is the same place.
So the burning bush is at the end of his time in Midian as a shepherd.
Exactly. So Moses is sent to deliver the people out of Egypt. Mm. And he says, what shall I do? I can't speak. I'm not up to the task. And the Lord says, and again, this is Jesus. This is pre-incarnate Christ who is speaking to him. And if you want to check further into that, and you haven't listened to our previous podcast, look at the Malach, the mysterious angel. Yeah. That'll get into that. But this is Christ. This is the pre-incarnate Christ who is with Moses. And he says that go to Egypt, and this will be a sign that I'm speaking to you, that you will come back with them and worship me on this mountain. So this mountain is the same mountain, yes, that Moses has the encounter with the angel of the Lord, or Malach Yahweh, or the Lord, Yahweh, out of the burning bush. So the Lord sends Moses to redeem the people, to bring them out of the land of Egypt, and the purpose is to bring them out of that and then into the land of promise. So the stops are supposed to be out of the land of Egypt to Mount Sinai, because you're going to come back and worship me on this mountain, and then to go to the land promised to Abraham and his offspring, which is the land of Canaan. Mm-hmm. So that's the process that they're supposed to go. That's the path. Now, when did this happen? That's a big debate, the Exodus dating. I'm of the early date opinion, 1446, then in and around there. That's something that we really don't have time to get into, but I find that to have the most compelling evidence for it. Mm-hmm. The early date at 1446 really does, I think, fit into the overall scheme of biblical dating, going forward, going back to Abraham and going forward to Solomon and beyond. So there's a birth of a nation, and I think I've talked about this before, but I'll repeat it again. There's the birth of a nation. The nation of Israel was conceived in the promises given to Abraham. That's the conception. The promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The nation was conceived there. And there's even promises. A nation will come from you. Mm-hmm. Or even nations will come from you. But this is the nation. And then it is planted in the womb of Egypt. And then towards the end of the gestational period, after the baby has grown, there's trial. There's birth pangs. And then the water splits, or the water breaks. And out comes the baby, the birth of a nation. So rather than, we're not going to really go into the dynamics of the Exodus. We know there were 10 plagues. There was the Passover. There was the breaking of the Red Sea, and they came out. After that, they're now an independent nation. They're no longer under the oppression or the oversight of the Egyptians, because the Lord destroyed the Egyptians and Pharaoh. So what now? Well, now we're going to shift metaphors from a birth to a marriage. So it takes a little bit for them to get to Mount Sinai. So they travel to Mount Sinai, and the Lord provides bread and protection for them as they are going, and victories in battle. Mm-hmm. So they get to Mount Sinai, and this is the place where they are called to worship the Lord. Now, the Lord begins to establish the Mosaic Covenant, or the Mosaic Code and law, with them, as not only on Mount Sinai, but even there's some preparation for some of these things during the Exodus, like Passover. He instructs them this is to be an observance for you every year. So there's even before they get to Sinai, there's preparatory things in regards to what they're going to be doing. So the covenant of Moses, it's a covenant, it's a law, it's a Torah, it's a law, it's that which the Lord commands Israel. By some counts, there are 613 specific laws in the Mosaic Code. So, and this gives some people within certain circles fits, but I do think it is helpful that we explore the realms of the Mosaic law, the Mosaic Covenant, within these spheres. You have the ceremonial aspects of the law. You have the civil aspects of the law, and you have the moral aspects of the law. And again, these things aren't mutually exclusive all the time. You can't always just place one there and say it's not part of the other. But I do think that it's helpful because they're a nation now. So there needs to be, number one, civil aspects, crime and punishment. Mm-hmm. And we find that throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The ceremonial aspects of the law has to do with the worship of the Lord through the Levitical priests and the Levitical operation. Now, who are the Levites? The Levites were a tribe that the Lord chose during the days of the journey, or not the journey, but the stay at Sinai. Of course, he chose them before the foundation of the earth, but as far as the Lord executing it on the earth, he chose the Levites. And that was the tribe of Moses and the tribe of Aaron as well. Mm-hmm. So they were the ones through whom the Mosaic ceremonial aspects, and even some civil aspects and moral aspects, of course, were to be administered. So the Levitical code was important. If you were going to be a priest, you had to be a Levite. You had to be from the tribe of Levi. And
then more specifically, as we move along, it's descendants of Aaron.
House of Aaron. Exactly. So within the ceremonial aspects, there were people, there were times, and there were places. So the people were of course, the Mosaic law was that which was binding upon the Israelites. Now, foreigners could come in and have some participation within these things, but ultimately this was with the nation of Israel. Mm-hmm. But the people that administered the code and the place of the law were the Levites, or those of the tribe of Levi. And the priests would administer at a place. So we have people, we have then a place. Now the ceremonial aspects of the law had to do with offering and sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And the Lord had the Israelites construct at first what we call a tabernacle, which was a tent. And so that was mobile. So this was part and parcel to the Mosaic law. If you were going to obey the Mosaic law, you had to obey these sacrificial codes. And there are a lot of them. This is part of the 613. This is ceremonial aspects. There was a lot of codes in regards to offering and sacrifice. So much that it can make your head spin, getting back into these things. It's very involved. The place was for a time the tabernacle. But then the Lord chose a certain place for it to become stationary. And that was on Mount Zion or Mount Moriah. And that's where the temple was built. And so the priests and the Levitical priests would then administer their sacrifices and offerings there at the temple. That again was part and parcel to the Mosaic Covenant. So then you have people, places, and also times. People, places, and times. The times were within the Mosaic Code, you were only supposed to do things at certain times. Mm-hmm. Certain people were supposed to do things at certain times, certain places. So the amazing thing about the Mosaic Code is it's very narrow. Mm-hmm. Not anybody could be a priest. Not even if you're a Levite, you might be disqualified, because there are other qualifications in regards to passing through purity tests to see whether or not you qualified. You couldn't just...
Just an aside, along those lines, there was a rebellion that came up. There was the followers of Korah end up kind of like, well, why should they be in charge? We lay claim to this kind of thing. And I know Phil Johnson of Grace to You has a fantastic sermon on it called Korah's Rebellion that gets into that and stuff. But
and that's ultimately rebellion against God.
Exactly.
Because God rebelled, or God set these things up, and they rebelled against the Lord. And another one is Jeroboam in the split of the kingdom. Right after that, Jeroboam sets up his own dates, his own places, and his own people. And that became a sin for the northern kingdom all the way through. So again, the people, you couldn't just say, I want to do it. I'm of the tribe of even Judah, a prominent tribe. I'm in the tribe of Judah. Nope. You are to administer at the altar under the Mosaic Code. You were to be a Levite. Then, you have the times or the places. The only place to sacrifice was either the tabernacle or later the temple.
Not on Mount Gerizim.
Not on Mount Gerizim, nope. Which Gerizim, of course, was where the Samaritans saw as a place of worship, of sacrifice. And then you have the times. Well, another thing about the places, and you put together the times, the Holy of Holies. Only one person could go into that place, the only place, once a year. Mm-hmm. And so, again, the narrow dynamics of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. So, I think, I don't know if we talked about this before, but the Holy of Holies, all of these things are patterns. The law has patterns.
Yeah.
And I think we maybe talked about this, but the square nature, the cubed nature of the Holy of Holies, the only other cubed nature or cubed measurement in the scriptures that I'm aware of
the city
is the city of Jerusalem, which it isn't just one person once a year. Under the new covenant, it's all of God's people for all time. Mm-hmm. So the doors are swung open, the veil's torn.
Much bigger cube as well.
It better be. Yeah, that's because God planned it that way. So the covenant is ultimately established in, if we want to again look at some of the important texts in Exodus chapter 24. Moses comes up.
We're getting kind of lively up there.
Yeah, no kidding.
Sons and nephews upstairs. I don't think it's coming through on the microphone, but yeah.
So in verse 3 of chapter 24, this is the people that came out of Egypt, and Moses has gone up to the mountain. And we read in verse 3, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice and says, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Moses took half the blood and put it on the basins, and half the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So the Mosaic Covenant was this is kind of the marriage ceremony here. The terms are read, they agree to the covenant, and it's sealed with blood. So animal blood here, but it's sealed with blood. And notice that they say, we will do this. We will be obedient. Now, the heart of the Mosaic law, this is an interesting thing to kind of consider, and I often, when I'm teaching on the Mosaic law, I talk about how the Mosaic law, although we certainly understand the robust and involved nature of it, we can see that 613 laws can be distilled down in their heart to 10, and that's what the Lord does on the tablets of stone. We have the famous 10 Commandments. And so they're really distilled down to those things, and you can see how.
Yeah, we see Jesus take it down to 2.
Yeah, and that's the next step to distill it down.
Yeah.
So you can distill those things down to, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which is distilling down the 613, and of course the 10, because the first 4 are about worshiping and loving the Lord, and the next 6 are about how we interact and love with our neighbor. Mm-hmm. Again, you look at that, love the Lord your God, and another huge thing to look again in regards to the 10 Commandments is, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. And this was the heart of the law. The warning against going after other gods, going after idols. And, I've had some people in my village classes, ask me, why was idolatry such a great sin? Well, because idols are ones that lead you away from the worship of the true and living God, which is what is most important. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, from a practical standpoint, idols are going to have you practice all sorts of illicit wickedness. You look at what went on and goes on within the realm of idolatrous practices. It is illicit, abominable things. And so righteousness comes from worshiping God and following him. Mm-hmm. And that's loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. These 2 huge things that I would say transcend the law of Moses. They are found in the law of Moses. They are good, but they transcend the law of Moses. What I mean by that is they were found before the law of Moses, mm-hmm. and they are connected to the new covenant. Yeah. The new covenant, as we see, when the new covenant comes and the law of what's called the law of Christ is stressed, It is the law of love, loving God and loving neighbor. But one thing that I want us to remember about this is there is a particular order here. Because a lot of people want to elevate this loving your neighbor thing, which again, it's a good command when taken within its context. But loving your neighbor has become so twisted.
Oh yeah.
In the world that there is a
they're redefining
they redefine it, and they forget that the first step is loving the Lord your God. You can't love your neighbor if you're not loving the Lord your God first. So loving the Lord your God is following him, obeying him, doing all these things, and only then can you truly love your
allowing
neighbor.
him to set the terms there and how that happens.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that is something that is key. So what happens? What the Mosaic Covenant, it is a joining between the Lord and Israel, his nation. And the Mosaic Covenant, although, as we would say, good in its essence, there is a problem with the covenant. And the problem doesn't come from the Lord who gives the law. It doesn't come from the words themselves. It comes from one of the parties that enters into the covenant. Israel is the problem. And that's one of the things that we find. Israel continually goes after idols. Continually. In fact, when Moses comes down from the mountain, what does he find? The golden calf. And that's tantamount to finding, again, within the marriage dynamic, it's tantamount to finding your spouse in bed with another on the wedding night. Now, the Lord forgives in the sense that he does not wipe out the nation. That's a lot of times when we see the Lord forgives, it doesn't mean that everything's hunky-dory and there's no consequences. He isn't going to give the full force of the wrath that is deserved at that point.
Yeah.
And so ultimately what happens then, after about a year at Sinai, by most counts, they break camp at Sinai and declare it's time to go. The Lord declares it's time to go and possess the land. And so there's a spying out of the land of promise by the 12 spies, one from each tribe. And the spies come back with a report of fear. At least 10 of the 12 do. 10 of the 12 come back with a report of fear. Moses has them go to the promised land to look it out because the Lord brought them out of the land of Egypt to bring them into the land of promise. And in Numbers 13 and 14, we read of the rebellion, another rebellion against the Lord, where Joshua and Caleb were two that came back and said, if the Lord delights in us, we are well able to take them. But the 10 had a fear of the strongholds, of the people, and of the giants in the land. That's another interesting theme we can maybe pick up on some episode, is the theme of giants in the scriptures. The scriptures from Genesis to David have a very interesting strand of giants. And it'll be very interesting to take a look at and see how those things are interwoven. Nevertheless, historically then, the people at this point rebel. They want to go back to Egypt, and they want to kill Joshua and Caleb. And the Lord then says, I'm going to destroy them and start a new nation with you, Moses. Now, we kind of already know the Lord is, again, in this point, is speaking to draw Moses into intercession. Mm-hmm. Because from a sovereignty perspective and from a sovereign plan perspective, we know that the Lord isn't going to wipe out Judah, because he promised the Messiah to be coming through Judah. Yeah. So Moses comes and intercedes, and the Lord forgives. And again, the forgiveness here isn't everything's hunky-dory. It's actually really horrible. Not that the Lord forgives, but the consequences that come. The people are so rebellious that the Lord says, because you have rebelled against me and not trusted me, he says, from Egypt until now, he says that from all those in the census 20 and up, you're all going to die in the wilderness. And he takes an oath. None of you are going to enter into my rest. So that enters into the next 40 years of the wilderness wanderings. The wilderness wanderings. So Moses is wandering with the children of Israel throughout the wilderness. Now, the children of Israel do not get their act together in the wilderness. They keep going after other gods. They keep rebelling against the Lord. They die from the plagues that the Lord sends them, even though the Lord is still being very gracious to them, because he's providing them still protection and provisions in the wilderness. They're not settled anywhere.
Yeah.
And so just to kind of look at that general period, we have that 40 years, and they kind of wander most of the time to the east of the Jordan and the land of Israel. And they're overlooking from the land of Midian. And that's where, when we get to the end of the wilderness wanderings, that's where the precipice of entering the promised land happens. Now, we know Moses...
Midian, you mean Moab?
Midian and Moab. Yeah,
Okay.
they're both right there. But yeah, Moab too. Yes, you're right. It probably is more specifically Moab. The plains of Moab. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and Moses is not able to enter into the promised land, and the Lord is going to raise up another to enter into the promised land and take the people into the promised land, because that generation dies out. But before they enter into the promised land, we have Deuteronomy, which is Moses' sermon to the children of Israel, proclaiming the law and the need to listen. And the chapter of Deuteronomy that is so important for us to recognize is Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy chapter 28. So what we find in Deuteronomy chapter 8 is the list of the blessings and the curses. The blessings and the curses. Now, if you look through Deuteronomy 28, you'll see that chapter 28 is quite a long one. And the blessings for obedience are verses 1 through 14. And then the curses for disobedience are 15 through 68. So it's kind of a harbinger of what is to come. The law is really not going to be something that brings about blessing. It's going to bring about curses. Not that the law is evil. The law of the Lord is good. The problem is with the people. Mm-hmm. And so the problem is they don't obey. And so to see the beginning in verse 1 of chapter 28, we read, "If you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all the commandments that I command you today, the Lord will set you high above the nations of the earth, And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. So then we have the blessings. And obviously it's a 68 verse chapter, so we're not going to go through everything here. But there's in essence, there are three things that the Lord promises in regards to blessing if they obey. One is there will be plenty in their fields, plenty in their in their children. The Lord is going to bless them with bounty, with plenty. The other thing, there will be protection. The nations may come in, and the Lord will fight for them, and they are going to be defeated. Thirdly,
on that line, I was just reading with my daughter. We went through First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First Chronicles. We're now in Second Chronicles, and you bring that up. Ethiopia came up against, and I hadn't remembered this particular incident. 1 million soldiers came up from Ethiopia, and under King Asa in Jerusalem, and the Lord protected them.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point, because I want to ask the question here. When the Lord does protect and defeat the enemy, because he's going to do that plenty of times. Mm-hmm. He's going to do it during the days of the judges, during the days of the kings, even with a northern kingdom who never has a righteous king. Right. He fights and defeats the people. Now the question is it because they got their act together, or is it because the Lord is gracious? And my contention is the Lord does these things because he's gracious. He does bring blessings. But
even they're getting their act together, it was an act of grace on his part.
Exactly. Yeah, when and if they did.
Right.
But so back to the threefold blessings. You have plenty, you have protection, and then you have possessing the land. You will possess the land that I promised to your forefathers. So those are the three points of blessing. Now the curses are quite vividly noted. And rather than having plenty, there will be famine. Famine all throughout the land, including in the womb. Mm-hmm. So there will be famine. And that's an important thing when you go through the scriptures and you read like there was a famine in the land. That's not just saying, oh, well, it was just a rough time in Israel at that time. They're under a covenant with the all-sovereign Lord of the universe that if they are having a famine, it's because they are in disobedience. That's...
Yeah, I'm thinking of Elijah and
exactly.
You got Ahab and Jezebel.
3 years. Yeah, and so it wasn't just it's tough times. This was you are being disobedient to the Lord. You're going after. Usually, you're going after other gods. Mm-hmm. You're going after idols. So then there's plunder rather than protection, and there's plenty of times Israel gets plundered. Mm-hmm. Because they don't listen. It happens right away after the Battle of Jericho, when people are doing illicit things. You have the disobedience that's going on during the days of Samuel, that the ark is taken, and of course that doesn't bode well for the Philistines. But
some of my favorites. Was it 1 Samuel 5?
Yeah.
Where's the second Samuel? I think it's 1 Samuel 5. It was one of my favorite.
Yeah, so good.
With Dagon.
Dagon just can't stay upright. And so there's famine, there's plunder, and this is the climax of the curses. Mm-hmm. Rather than possessing the land, they will be exiled. They will be kicked out, and they will be a byword among the nations. They will be persecuted among the nations. That is the climax of the curses. So the Mosaic Covenant is the backdrop to the history of Israel. Mm-hmm. It really is. I shouldn't say it's the backdrop. because you can also say
so much of it, yeah.
because the Abrahamic promise and the Davidic covenant and the New Covenant also have their say,
right? But you get into, I mean, a lot of their history is the exile in
right.
Babylon, and then in
as
Persia,
far as we look at the history that we have right now, yes, that is up to this point. Yes, it is the curses of the law, and we need to have that understanding. And it's also crucial for us to have this understanding as we approach the New Testament, because the New Testament speaks of the forging and the introduction of a new covenant. Now, we won't go there because we need to save stuff for the New Covenant, and we'll wait to get to Jeremiah 31 when we get to the New Covenant. But the New Covenant is specifically juxtaposed to the Old Covenant in Jeremiah 31, where the Lord says, "Behold, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers when I took them out by the hand and led them out of Egypt, a covenant they broke even though I married them." So when we get to the New Testament, I would argue the vast majority of the New Testament is about this transition from the Mosaic Covenant and then the establishment of the New Covenant, which really happened at the cross. Because Jesus, when he took the cup, he says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." And then new covenant realities began to be poured out 50 days after the resurrection at Pentecost, when the Spirit was poured out by the Lord.
And I'm sure we'll get into it with the New Covenant, but I mean, that parallel you got there, that the Mosaic Covenant really began with the slaughtering of the Passover lamb.
Yeah.
And then the New Covenant begins with the slaughtering of the Passover lamb.
Exactly. And the greater one. One's a shadow, and the other one's the greater fulfillment, the final one. And that lamb imagery is one that is embedded throughout the scriptures, going back to Abraham, and then the Passover lamb, and then Jesus in Revelation. He's called the Lamb. So with the time that we have left,
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Is that till an hour?
Yeah.
So,
well, we can go a little longer, but we're at 48 right now.
Yeah. With the time that we have left, let's just have a conversation about. We'll use Hebrews chapter 8 as a springboard, but we'll talk a little bit about the challenge that people bring about of we still are to be Torah observant as believers in Messiah. And that is something that I see, in fact, perhaps growing in a lot of, at least, realms that I've seen. The Torah observant community that says Jesus is the Messiah, but we still must
keep kosher,
worship on Saturdays, all of those things. Yeah. So, let's turn to Hebrews chapter 8. And this is within the context of Jesus being announced as the great high priest, not after the Levitical order. So it's very clear he's not a priest of the Levitical order. He's not a priest of the Mosaic Covenant, because the priesthood of the Mosaic Covenant was of Levi. And the whole point here is that there's another priest and a priesthood that was predated Levi, which was the priesthood of Melchizedek, who was and this new king after the order of Melchizedek, this new priest, Jesus, is one who is made not on the basis of bodily descent, but based on the power of an indestructible life and an oath. You're a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And this is the new covenant priesthood. And really quick in verse 22 of chapter 7 first, we see that it's with all of this taking place, it says, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. And so those that are against this kind of sharp distinction that I do see between the Old and New Covenant, I do see a sharp distinction between the two. And those that want to say that the new covenant is just a reestablishment of the Mosaic Covenant, or a greater revelation of the Old Covenant, of the Mosaic Covenant, I think the author of Hebrews very clearly says, no, there's a contrast here. That covenant was one that did not bring about blessing, and that priesthood ultimately does not bring about the salvation from sins. And in verse 28 of 7, it says, the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of oath, that's Psalm 110 verse 4, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. And then we get down to verse 6, but as it is, of chapter 8, verse 6 of chapter 8, but as it is, Christ has obtained a better ministry that is much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. Some say, well, this isn't about covenant, this is just about priesthood. But that's not what this is saying. No. It's saying that this covenant he mediates is better. And then we see, for if the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second.
Yeah, there would have been no need.
Right. Yeah. So this is a new covenant, one that is different than the, again, old. It says old here. So, and then notice in verse 8, for he finds fault with them when he says. So notice the fault isn't with the covenant itself. The fault is with the people. Yeah. The people. And then we have a listing of Jeremiah 31 verses 31 through 34 in Hebrews 8, or verses 8 through 12. And then in verse 13, he says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what was becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away.
Well, there you go. I mean, there's
I think it's
the argument against Torah observance right there.
Yeah, I think so.
Or, you go back to the Paul and the Judaizers and whatnot.
Acts 15 is another one.
Yeah.
Yep. Galatians is another one. Paul it speaks of the new covenant in Second Corinthians chapter 3. How again, it's almost a mini Hebrews, and so this is important stuff. This isn't theology that we would say, oh, we can agree to disagree on this. If you are saying one is justified by their faith and the works of the law, and that one, if they are going to be pleasing to God, they must be observing the law of Moses, then they are rebelling against Christ and his apostles. And again, you have...
Well, and then, I'd put this note on here as we were going. I didn't want to interrupt, but, so much of this comes down to the purpose. What is the purpose of the Mosaic Covenant? We'll get into it with the New Testament, or the new covenant, but they have different purposes.
Yes. Yeah, different purposes. One is to what the law does is it shows the weakness of humans.
Yeah.
That we are weak. We can't save ourselves. Mm-hmm. And the law, a very key passage is at the beginning of Romans chapter 8. What the law could not do, weakened as it was through the flesh, God did by sending his own son.
Yeah.
So do we oppose the law of God? No, we love the law. Even looking back at the law of Moses, we love the law of Moses because it shows God's holiness. It shows man's wretchedness. It shows the patterns of Christ, all of these things. Christ said, I did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill, or abolish the law, but to fulfill. And, you know, a lot of Torah observant people look at that's their verse, that, oh, well, he didn't destroy the law or abolish the law. He's fulfilling the law. So if we're going to fulfill the law, we're to practice the law.
It's missing the point.
I think so too.
Yeah. I mean, and also I see these covenants, you know, both Mosaic and the New Testament in a regard. I'll get to why, but I see them as foils. Mm-hmm. I mean, in a big way.
Well, Paul did.
I think it's clear to see how the Mosaic covenant is a foil for the New Covenant. You know, we see the diamond of the New Testament only because of the black background of the Mosaic covenant. But even so, more so, we see, you know, people will ask, well, you know, simple questions as they're exploring their faith early on. You know, why does God allow evil? Why do we have this world? Why, even with the New Covenant, we're living in this time. Why do we still have suffering and pain and this horrible nature built into us and stuff? And I see it as another foil, that the New Testament is a promise of what we can expect in eternity, in our everlasting state. But we go through all of this even as we're worshiping the Lord on His terms, as a foil, that once we get to that eternal state, we're never going to ever want to go back. I mean, we have the promise of being made clean, made sinless. Mm-hmm. And well, that just raises the question, how long can that last? You know, Adam and Eve were sinless when they were created. How do we end up not just going right back to being sinful? And I think it's because we've gone through this state of our being and seeing the consequences of it.
And the other thing that I always tell people is how we won't go back to Adam and Eve is because we're in Christ. Because through Christ's intercession, we now are having His righteousness fueling us. And it's through that we look back at who we were, and we would never go back but
I think that's the whole point of all of history, from the garden to the return of Christ to bring in usher in His new kingdom.
Yeah.
The whole point of this period that we're living in now is so that when we get past it into the next phase, into his reign and into eternity, we will have known. I mean,
yeah, we've known like,
I mean, it's not just when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Mm-hmm. You know, knowledge wasn't just like an academic knowledge. It's an
experience,
an experiential knowledge. You know, when you talk about the Bible talks about marriage and knowing your spouse, it's not just that you are aware of them. I mean, it's about a deep knowledge, and that's how I see all of history.
And we'll see I think, you know, picking up on what you're laying down, I think the capacity to understand and take in the glory of God is going to be greater.
Exactly my point. Yeah. I mean, it's that foil. When we can see what a sinful world is like, His glory is going to be infinitely more pronounced when we see that sinful nature removed. When we see all of the curse just wiped out.
And to bring that back to the law, in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says, yes, there was glory that the law brought, but the new covenant brings such a glory that it's like this has no glory at all.
Right. And that's why I'm thinking, like, the transition from Mosaic to new is so pronounced that the transition from new into eternal is going to be all the more pronounced. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something all of creation will be there to really experience, and it's that foil thing. I having a hard time coming up with the words to express it, but
talking about the world, and even talking really kind of zeroing in on Israel. The question is, you know, you and I believe in a future salvation of ethnic Israel. Mm-hmm. And the future salvation of ethnic Israel is going to be through the power of the new covenant.
Yeah.
So that one, you know, and this is a question I have a hard time answering because I really don't for sure know the answer. And it is, does the Mosaic law come to an end sometime in the first century? Or is the Mosaic law still functioning in the sense that the curses of the Mosaic law are still in operation because of the children of Israel rejecting them? And I don't know for sure.
It's a good question.
You know, it's a good question. I really don't know for sure the answer. I tend to lean towards that. Yeah, maybe the curses are still echoing.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said that the Lord is in his own way saying to ethnic Israel, you insist on staying under Moses, okay? I'm going to hold you to Moses.
And the curse, and here's the only way they're ever going to escape the curses of the Mosaic law is through the new. Is through coming to Christ. And that's this, and the new covenant was promised to Israel and to Judah. And that was the controversy of the first century, was that Gentiles were coming in and being partakers of the new covenant. The Spirit was coming upon the Gentiles. What is going on here? And that was the controversy. And of course, Paul explains this best in Romans 11, which the hardness, there's been a partial hardening upon Israel until the fullness of Gentiles comes in, and then all Israel will be saved, and that'll be through Christ in the power of the new covenant.
Yeah. But before we get to the New Testament, we'll be back with our next episode on the Davidic covenant.
And that'll be a lot of, again, we'll be making a lot of New Testament connections there, but we'll be looking at how the Davidic covenant is one that the New Testament speaks of so much. In fact, whenever we call the Lord the Christ, it's by and large a reference back to the Davidic covenant, that the anointed one is coming, or has come.
You want to take us out with our usual homework?
Yeah, so let's do 2 Samuel chapters 6 and 7. And then we'll also do Psalm 110. That's a fairly short psalm, and we talked a little bit about some of those things today. And then read Acts 2. Read Peter's sermon in Acts 2. And there we will see some of those elements of the Davidic covenant, both in the history of God giving the Davidic covenant to David, and then the promise that he gives in the poetic poetry of Psalm 110, and then Peter picking up on some of these things in Acts chapter 2 after the resurrection of Christ.
All right. Any closing thoughts, or...
No, I think I'm enjoying this. And next time the next time we meet, we'll be doing the Davidic covenant. Then we'll be doing the new covenant. Then we got to start coming up with some new topics.
Let's talk about giants.
We can talk about giants. Yeah, that could be on there.
Yeah, I almost think I need to kind of go back and speed listen to the past, because we've had a bunch of ideas and I just haven't written them down. But there's so many that we can get to. But
endless.
Yeah, so we will, Lord willing, we'll be back next month with another episode of the Bible Nexus.
All right, thanks, Andy.
You've been listening to the Bible Nexus podcast. Be sure to check out our website for further information and materials at thebiblenexus.com.